Hello everyone. Today I, Anushri Pandey from the Department of Buddhist Studies of University of Delhi will be discussing with you all module number 38 of paper number 12 Philosophy of Buddhism 1. This module deals with the development of the doctrine of selflessness, Buddhist theory of selflessness. This is also known as the Buddhist theory of no self. So, let's start with what is this word self. Generally, the term self or soul or Atma in Sanskrit means a permanent or everlasting absolute entity which is found in every individual. This absolute entity is said to be also the unchanging substance behind the almost ever-changing phenomenal world. According to some religion, this soul or self is present in each and every individual, and every individual has their own separate self. Some believes that this self is made by God, and after the death the self leaves the body, and according to its karma and the judgment of its creator is placed in heaven or hell. Some philosophical school like Advaita Vedanta believes that this self which is found in every individual takes numerous of birth unless it gets completely purified and finally gets combined or united with the ultimate, which is Brahman, from which the self was initially originated. So this concept of self or soul in an individual is said to be the thinkers of thought, the feelers of any feeling or sensation, and the receiver of any kind of good or bad karma. But this concept of self was completely negated by the Buddha. According to Buddha, such concepts of self or God are merely a false and an empty concept. These concepts are so much deep-rooted in man that so many philosophical schools enumerated or elaborated various metaphysical or psychological doctrines. And these doctrines are so close that no human being are ready to accept anything against this doctrine. Buddha was knowing this very well that his teaching was against the current flow of the society. But his teaching also never supported any kind of ignorance, any kind of fear which is found in an individual. According to Buddha, the concept of a self is completely a false and imaginary. It has no connection with the reality. It is because such idea of self gives rise to the feeling of I, me, myself, which it becomes a very destructive idea. Because such idea gives rise to the feeling of selfishness, hatred, carving, attachment, egoism, and this becomes cause of various kinds of conflict, whether small conflicts between individual or big conflicts which happens between two countries. According to Buddha, the idea of self or soul or even the idea of God comes from two innate ideas which is found in an individual. These two innate ideas are the idea of self-protection and the idea of self-preservation. In the idea of self-protection, a human being or individual makes the idea of God, someone who is supreme or superior to him, in order for their self-protection, well-being. Next comes the idea of self-preservation. For this idea, man made the concept of an immoral, a permanent self or Atma. It is because of fear, ignorance, and carving in man that he needs these two concepts for his comfort. So, this is how the concept of self or Atma originated in a human being. Now, let us discuss why Buddha rejected them and what is the basis of this theory of no self. According to Buddhism, the doctrine of no self or the doctrine of selflessness, also known as anatta in Sanskrit, is made up of by analyzing two methods. The first method is synthetic method and the second is analytic method. In synthetic method, the doctrine of pratitya samutpad will be analyzed, and in the method of analytic, the 5 aggregates which forms a human will be analyzed. So first, let us discuss about the analytic method. The analytic method, as I've told you, in which the 5 aggregates which forms a human being or an individual will be examined. These 5 aggregates are matter, sensation, perception, mental formulation, and consciousness. These are nicely and perfectly described in the First Noble Truth. According to the First Noble Truth, an individual is composed of these 5 aggregates. So, when we analyze these 5 aggregates, we find that there is nothing beyond or more than these 5 aggregates which forms a human being. As a result, there is no concept of soul or self beyond this. So this is the first way of rejecting the concept of self in Buddhism. Next method, which is synthetic method, will be discussed. In this method, the doctrine of pratitya samutpad, also known as the doctrine of dependent origination, is examined. According to this doctrine, nothing in this world is permanent or absolute. Everything which we find in this world are relative, are dependent. They have some cause or effect. They are not absolute and not permanent. This doctrine is also known as Buddhist theory of relativity. The theory of pratitya samutpad or dependent origination is considered to be the central teaching of Buddhism, because from this the theory of karma, the theory of momentariness, the theory of no self, and theory of causal efficiency derives. Now, what are these 12 links which we find in the dependent origination? The first is ignorance. Next comes impression or our karmic forces. Then comes the initial consciousness of the embryo. After this comes psychophysical organism. Then comes the 6 sense organs including mind. Then the sense organ contact. Then sense experience. After this comes the thirst for this sense enjoyment. Then the cling to this enjoyment. After this comes will to born. Then birth or death, and finally old age, and death. These are the 12 links or 12 factors which forms the doctrine of dependent origination, also known as the Buddhist theory of relativity. These links should be considered in a circle, not as a chain. It is a circle which shows how an individual is born in this world and then how he leaves this world. In this circle, the first two links are associated with our past life, and the last two links are associated with our future life, and rest all which are found in middle are associated with our present life. Therefore, we can see from this doctrine that everything in this world are relative. They are interdependent and interconnected with some other things. There is nothing in this world which can be termed as ultimate or absolute. This wheel of dependent origination is also known as Bhav Chakra, Dharma Chakra, or Pratitya Samutpad. Therefore, according to Buddhism, there is no first cause because every factor depends upon some other factors. So, by analyzing the theory of Pratitya Samutpad or the dependent origination, we arrive that there is no concept of self which is permanent and absolute. So, we see that by analyzing the Pratitya Samutpad by synthetic method and the 5 aggregates which forms an individual by analytic method, we find that nothing is termed as self or soul is found in human being. Buddha further said that there is no self inside or outside the human being. There is completely no self. Now, a question arises that if there is really no self, then why we use expressions such as I, you, being, and many more like this? For this, in Buddhism, they have made the two types of truth and made a distinction between these two types of truth. The first is the conventional truth and the next is the ultimate truth. This difference between two truths are made in order to remove our confusion which we make while we use the terms as I, you, self, oneself, other self, and etc. In conventional truth, it is said that when we use such expression like I, you, it is in our daily language, it is because of the convention which we have made depending upon our comfort in daily life. So, this is called conventional truth. That is, we have made such expressions in order to make our daily language comfortable. Now comes the ultimate truth. What is the ultimate truth? According to Buddhism, the ultimate truth is that there is no such expressions like I, you, a self in reality. It is completely different from conventional truth and it has no importance in ultimate truth. So we can see that this difference, with the help of this difference, we are able to make ourselves clear that the usage of these words are completely different from its real nature, its position in the ultimate reality. Therefore, To support the view of no self, Buddha gave three quotes. The first one is, all things in this world are conditioned and relative and impermanent. The second quote is that all these conditioned things are dukkha, suffering or miseries. And the third quote is that all dharmas are without any self or soul. So, with the help of these three quotes, Buddha tried to establish that there is no self in a man and outside his anywhere in this world. Now he has used the word dharma. Dharma is the most important concept in Buddhism. There is no wider concept or no broader concept than dharma in Buddhism. There is nothing beyond this. Dharma includes everything in this world, whether it is relative, conditioned, or impermanent. So, this dharma includes both conditional as well as unconditional things which is absolute in this world. And Buddha has said that there is no dharma without any self. So, we see that dharma also has no self in it. So, on this basis, Buddha rejects again the concept of self. This rejection or the theory of no self is also accepted by both the major Buddhist tradition, also known as the Hinayana and the Mahayana. In order to find the concept of self in Buddhism, some scholars have misinterpreted some quotes of Buddha teaching. For example, the first is Atahi Ataho Nato. This quote is generally translated as the self is the lord of the self. But this translation is wrong. Here, the word Ata is translated or wrongly misinterpreted as self or soul. Whereas here, the word Ata is a Pali word which is used as a reflexive pronoun, which means myself, yourself, oneself, etc., not the self or the soul. Further, in this quote only, the next word Nato is also misinterpreted as Lord, whereas it means protection, support, or help. Therefore, the correct meaning of this quote, which is Atahi Ananto Natho, is that one is one's own help or support. It does not mean that one or self is the lord of the self. So, the correct translation of this quote, as I have said, is that one is one's own help or support, which means that one must always rely on himself or herself and must not rely on other people for any kind of help. So, this is how many scholars have misinterpreted other quotes also in order to find the concept of self. But all of this have been misinterpreted. Now comes the further analysis on the concept of self. People sometimes take the meaning of self as a mind or consciousness. But this is again wrong. Because according to Buddha, one should limit the concept or the idea of self to the physical body only and not to mind or consciousness. It is because our mind or consciousness are in continuous flux. They change very fast. They change every minute, every day, every night, every second. So, in the first place, we give that a self is a permanent, non-changing entity. And next, we compare it with our consciousness, which changes rapidly. So, this creates a contradiction between the two concepts. So, this has no correspondence with reality. So, if we compare the notion or the concept of self with our consciousness or mind, this will lead to contradiction. And if you limit this with the physical body only, then the level of the contradiction will be not so much, because our physical body does not change in that rapid speed as our consciousness or mind changes. So Buddha says that one should only limit the concept of self to the physical body only and should not reach to the consciousness. Then it will be very wrong to hold that if we say that Buddha gave the theory of no self, which is completely negative or it does not have any positive characteristics in it. It is because the concept of no self is actually the concept of reality. It is equivalent to the reality, and reality according to Buddhism is nirvana. So we cannot say any reality is negative. Buddha again holds that the such feelings of self creates the feeling of I am, and this I am gives rise to destruction, to various kinds of hatred feeling. Therefore, an individual must not have the affirmative side of self, which means I have a self, or the negative side of the self, which means I don't have any self. Because these two expressions, that is I have self and I don't have self, comes from the word I am, which again indirectly proves the existence of self. Therefore, in order to solve this problem, one should make effort to have a neutral feeling or a neutral expression on such concept. Not only on concept of self, but one must try to make an effort to have a neutral view on any object or anything in this world. It is because in this world we find compounds of psychical and physical aggregates, and which are in constant flux, and they are governed by the law of cause and effect. So, if we use such expressions like I am or I am not, so this will lead to a problem. Therefore, Buddha says that if it is possible, one must try to have a neutral view on everything in this world, which also includes a neutral view on the self. So, this is what Buddha has explained in the theory of no self. This theory is not a negative theory as I have told you earlier. This is equivalent to the reality, and reality is always true. And reality for Buddhism, as I've told you, is nirvana. So, this doctrine of self or the theory of no self, which is formed by the Buddhist, helps to remove all the false idea, all the false belief or concept which are inside us and which gives rise to darkness or ignorance. So, in order to avoid such problem, one should not believe in such empty concept which is self. So, this was all about the theory of no self in Buddhism. Now, let us fast or quickly discuss of what we have studied today. Firstly, we discussed about the concept of self. What is this self? According to some religion, this self is permanent, unchanging entity which is found in every individual. This self is different in different individual. And also, this self, according to the karma, goes to heaven or hell after the death of the body. Buddhism completely deny the existence of such self or soul inside a human or outside a human being. According to teaching of Buddha, such concept of self is imaginary. It is a false idea and has absolutely no match with reality. Further, such idea of self is also responsible for producing harmful and destructive ideas of I, me, mine, myself, etc. It is because such ideas give rise to the feeling of hatred, selfishness, carving, desire, and various types of attachment towards the worldly object, which ultimately leads to the suffering or various kinds of conflict, whether big conflict or a small conflict. Therefore, Buddha says that this idea of self is completely false. This idea of self is actually the result of two innate ideas which is found in an individual. The first idea is the idea of self-protection. In this, human being created the concept of God in order to protect himself and for his own well-being. Next comes the idea of self-preservation. In this idea, human being created the concept of self, which is permanent and absolute. To reject this theory of self, there are two methods are used in Buddhism. The first one is analytic method, in which the 5 aggregates which forms an individual is analyzed, and the next is synthetic method, in which the doctrine of dependent origination, also known as Buddhist theory of relativity, is examined. While examining these two doctrines, the first 5 aggregates and the next is the dependent origination, we find that everything in this world is relative, conditional. There is nothing permanent or absolute thing which we call self. Further, there is nothing beyond these five aggregates. So the idea of self is completely false. Then we have discussed that how some people have tried to equivalent the soul with the consciousness or the mental state. But this is again wrong. According to Buddha, if we make ourselves equivalent to the consciousness, we give rise to a certain contradiction. Because on the one hand, we are saying that our self is permanent, it is absolute, and on the other hand, we are saying it is equivalent to that consciousness or mental state which is in continuous flux. It changes every second, every moment, and every day and every night. So how a permanent thing which is self is equivalent to a thing which is in continuous flux? So if one makes our self equivalent to our consciousness, then problems arises. In order to solve this problem, Buddha said it is better if we have a neutral view towards such object. Not only self, but one should always have a neutral view towards each and every object in this world. Because everything in this world is a compound of physical and mental things, which are under the law of flux. They are governed by certain cause and effect. So, if we make any views, either affirmative or negative, towards such things or any things in this object, it gives rise to various problems. Further, it is very wrong to hold that the theory of no self is actually a negative theory. It is because this is the theory of reality, and the reality according to Buddhism is nirvana. So the theory of no self is truth. It helps one to remove all the darkness in his life, which is the cause of ignorance and suffering. Therefore, one should not take it as a negative theory. It is a theory which corresponds to reality. So, this was all about the theory of no self or the doctrine of selflessness. That's all. Thank you.